You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm your host for BioTalk. I'm really excited about this BioTalk today because one of the first BioTalks I ever did was with Doug Liu almost 5 years ago, which was one of the original board members for BioHealth Innovation, who has since moved on and retired. But Qiagen has been a loyal and growing supporter of both BHI and the BioHealth Capital Region for many years. And I'm really excited to have the Associate Director for Global Licensing with Qiagen, Ray Blanchard, to chat with today about all the exciting stuff going on with this global company with its North American headquarters in Germantown, Maryland. So, Ray, welcome to BioTalk.
Thank you, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to have a chance to catch up with you.
Yeah, and one thing I'll mention, even though we don't see each other that much, is Sean Augerson, who is the VP Regional Operations for the Americas and APAC, is currently serving on the BioHealth Innovation Board. But over the last couple of years, we haven't seen much of each other because he's been traveling a lot. And of course, the pandemic's impacted that for everybody. But Ray, you and I are getting a chance to get an update here while Sean is saving us around the world. So we're excited to hear about all the good stuff that's been going on within Qiagen.
Yes, thank you, Rich. I agree. This is where I started working with Doug and have continued working with Sean to help support Qiagen's activities here on our local life sciences ecosystem.
Thank you very much. And I think for our listeners, what we always start with is, since a lot of people have not met you, nor probably do they know that you're very active globally because you're involved with global licensing, I like to start with you giving a little background for the listeners of how you evolved to where you are today within Qiagen. So Ray, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. It's been a fascinating journey for me. I'd have to say that I started off as a science nerd and really with love of the ocean and marine biology. I started when I was doing, this was in Los Angeles growing up. And when I did my undergraduate work in biochemistry, I took one of the first recombinant DNA technologies classes on campus, found that I really loved the aspect of working with the DNA technologies. And that's been a theme for me throughout my life there. So I continued on to get my doctorate at UC Riverside and moved on from there to a postdoc at the University of Florida, where I helped establish the first human nutritional genomics laboratory in the Food Science and Human Nutrition Department. My wife and I thought that might be a short stay going back to home in California. That was not to be the case. Moved from there from postdocing into faculty. However, I had never planned to stay in academia for a full career. Probably being the fact that I'm the son of an electrical engineer in the aerospace industry in California who was very successful, I felt like I would be better off moving into industry. I love the tools of molecular biology, genetic engineering, very much kind of the engineering mode of hating black boxes. And so when the opportunity came up to move into industry in 2004, I took a position as a senior scientist with a young 5-year-old company that was founded in Montgomery County called Super Array Bioscience. 3 years later, we rebranded to Assay Biosciences. And I went from being senior scientist with them to 3 years later, also with the branding, the president of the company asking me to step out of the lab and take over technology development for them, which was scouting for technologies for strategic platform expansions, conducting our in-licensing, and managing our patent filings and innovation program, which for me was a fantastic merger of business and the legal aspects of patents, as well as the technical underpinnings for these. And that's been the sort of the sweet area for me. And I really appreciate the opportunity that time I spent with Assay Biosciences was truly transforming to my life. I think, I'd like to say I started off as just a scientist with them. And Lee, the president of the company, believed that her scientists could learn strategic marketing and the basics for scalability solutions. And I think that basically it's that I drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak.
Well, it seems like it was a good flavor and it's worked well for you.
It has indeed. And after 5 years with that company, where we were seeing over 30% year-over-year growth, we went into due diligence with Qiagen, and Qiagen acquired us in December of 2009. So I have the benefit of having been in a small company and seen how that's grown very successfully, and then going through the integration, moving into Qiagen as well. to the larger global company.
And then how did Qiagen originally select Germantown, Maryland as a location for North America for them?
That's kind of an interesting story because although it predates me, I've tracked it. A lot of people in my company don't realize that I was a Qiagen customer in the late 1980s when just after Qiagen got started, which was in 1984. And it was all around plasmid preparations, DNA isolation. And I noticed that the blue boxes that were coming in with the classic Qiagen and diagonal had changed the manufacturing location from Dusseldorf, Germany to Chatsworth, California, which is a town on the northwest portion of Los Angeles County and is also my hometown.
Oh.
And I recognized which industrial complex was the facility for there. And that was Qiagen's very first U.S. office. They subsequently moved a little ways away to Valencia. They had a major West Coast presence, primarily to serve the America's customer base in a local time zone. But for a couple of reasons. One, timing-wise, being a 9-hour time difference to California from Dusseldorf. Also, the move at the late 90s to an interest in moving into molecular diagnostics and the fact that DNA isolation was being used for genetic testing meant that they were as an interest in really coming back and being closer to the regulatory bodies like the US FDA. And so when Qiagen started looking and realizing that the Americas are growing, they looked for someplace on the East Coast, someplace that was close to the DC with the US FDA, and ended up deciding on and purchasing into a site in Germantown on Germantown Road, of all places, for the German company. And that facility opened up our American headquarters in 2000. It is still our America's headquarters. We have facilities throughout the country as well as around the world. But that's where our Americas, and that manages both North America and South America from this area, all of the manufacturing that comes out from this area, as well as commercial operations, and then houses some of the global team members as well.
Well, our region has been a beneficiary of some wise decision-making that the company made many years ago. And I guess it's been good enough that they continue to grow and expand in that Germantown location. So, but before we go into some of the other elements around facilities and employees in our region, we've been talking about Qiagen, but people really don't know what you do. So why don't we go back and really talk about what are some of the major specialties that Qiagen is focused in today and some of the things that you've helped them transition into through some of the licensing and acquisition activities?
Certainly. No, thanks, Rich. Qiagen, for those of us who know the company well, it's an incredibly diverse company. We have a little bit of a brand struggle, if you will, because most of us our customers know us for a particular aspect of our business and don't realize that just how broad and diverse our business is. We are organized into 3 main business areas, one of which is life sciences, which focuses on non-regulated products for research with an emphasis on nucleic acids. The second business area is molecular diagnostics. So these are programs that are actually going in for fully approved IVD tests, both in the US, Europe, and other locations throughout the world. We truly take a global approach to our products, and I think it really shows when you look at the spectrum of our diagnostic products. Then third business area is Biomedical Informatics, the division we call Qiagen Digital Insights. This is really built out of interpretation of nucleic acid data, and especially, so it's a combination of analysis that's got to draw from not only the sequence data, but also what's existing in the world around us, whether it be publications, databases, and this is a large part of the business that goes into QDIs, provide the other peripheral types of support to help interpret the nucleic acid sequence information.
And then you talked about the 3 different areas, but who would your typical customers be that you would be selling your products to?
Again, that's a very diverse base. A challenge for our commercial team as we break it up. Each of those divisions has its own commercial team. In the basic research, though, we are selling into everything from academic labs. We're selling into the NIH, large labs, individual investigators. We are selling products into the clinical labs, both large and small. LabCorp request are as the big ones on there in the US, as well as the NIH and other labs in those areas. We also, within the diagnostics, this is both fully approved IVDs, but also a number of tests that are still offered as an RUO status to help research investigators that are out there. And for us, it's unique that we are very active in both of these segments. It's a challenge at times to manage the fact that non-regulated products need to stay non-regulated and be marketed in areas that are acceptable to the regulatory bodies. So we have built up very strong expertise around regulatory management for not only the submissions of IVDs, but managing the marketing aspects of non-regulated versus regulated products. And then when you look at the digital insights, these are oftentimes companies or organizations that are looking for database and large data set analysis. Oftentimes it's biopharma companies, and it can be large research medical centers that are coming into place. So it's a very diverse group of customers as well as products.
Great. Thank you for that. I think that helps educate our listeners a little bit more on both products as well as the customer base for you. And then you mentioned regulatory, and one of the original reasons that Qiagen came to the East Coast and the DC area was because of the FDA. Talk a little bit about how important or the interaction is that you do have with the regulatory body and the FDA in the United States.
Well, the regulatory aspects are very important and really came out form of also starting with two different acquisitions that Qiagen did early on in the 2000s. The first was the acquisition of an infectious disease PCR company called the Artis company out of Hamburg, Germany. And what we started doing to try to bring what were at that time self-declared CE-IVD products into the US. Kind of a rude awakening, as many European companies end up trying to bring those kind of products in the US. And then secondly, it led to we also moved into that with a full US investment when we acquired Digene in Gaithersburg, which is the inventor and parent company for the Digene HPV assay, which was the first reflux assay for questionable pap smears to identify oncogenic HPV variants. And that also brought us then a very well-established regulatory organization that helped us coordinate and build this out so that now we have a regulatory organization that extends throughout the world, Europe, the Asia Pacific region. And since much like patents are managed on a country-by-country basis, regulatory requirements are often managed on a country-by-country basis. And that kind of management also gets built into our operating systems. The systems that we're using for enterprise management, sales, manufacturing, supply chain predictions, all of that is also built in there. So throughout the entire company, we have both an infrastructure and culture of managing the different modes of there. So being close to the US FDA was really crucial for us. We've prided ourselves on being able to have a good, close understanding and working relationship with the FDA that allows us to really not only meet the requirements they're looking for, but also get heads up on things that are moving forward. And I think the area that's been most significant for us in working with this is when you look at next generation DNA sequencing or the massively parallel DNA sequencing that has taken place that has really turned the regulatory and the genetic testing market on its ear in the way the testing structure is set up and how it created new challenges for regulatory oversight of a multi-target test.
You know, what's interesting is when we talk about our region, which we call the BioHealth Capital Region, Ray, and we're talking with Ray Blanchard, who's the Associate Director for Global Licensing for Qiagen, is that we always talk about the benefit of being close to the FDA and close to NIH. And what you are in the real world talking about the real benefits that Qiagen has of being close to that regulatory body, but NIH is also a customer. So, I mean, you really have the benefit of, academia, which you mentioned too, with a high concentration of academia in our region that does research, as well as the NIH, which is the largest life science research entity in the world in your backyard. So you have them as a customer. And then since regulatory is so important, you've got the US FDA right down the street. So both of those federal bodies, which a lot of people don't understand what the benefit is to located in our region, Qiagen is definitely benefited from that.
You're absolutely right, Rich. That's very true. It's so much of what we're having to do is really about addressing customer workflows. Our tagline is sample to insight. Molecular analysis has really gotten quite complex over the last several decades, and many of the customers have questions that are much more fundamental than the technical details. And so what we look towards providing the new technologies that are coming out of both our customers that we're selling to in NIH and then learning and bringing out of the NIH and turning around and how adjusting them, creating robust workflows that then fit in towards a more of a medical application. And this is really one of the strengths of having both our life sciences arm with an MDX arm together, is that we can gain a great deal of institutional expertise in new technologies and workflow optimization going into a research market that allows us to make changes. It's easier, relatively easy to make changes to products and educate customers about why there's a benefit to doing so and having customers that embrace that change. It's a lot more challenging in a diagnostic setting when you are an IVD manufacturer and you have a very rigid set of guidelines that you have to go through for your approval processes. Any change to an IVD kit has to be reviewed and approved. And so it's a significantly larger investment to change a modification of an IVD product than life sciences. And when you're operating at really a cutting edge area like genetic analysis, this is a tricky thing to kind of balance on those two and bring them to these areas.
Well, I would imagine it's nice to be able to get in a car and go talk to the regulatory body rather than have to get in a plane from Germany and fly to the United States to talk to that regulatory body.
Yes, you're quite true. That is why we have such a strong regulatory presence here. And we're fortunate because actually the US FDA is really much of a trendsetter in terms of regulatory requirements throughout the world. There are countries that will basically yield to a US FDA approval and say, okay, then you're okay to come in here. In 2017, 2018, the European regulatory bodies went through a change, the IBDR, and much of the changes to the IBDR brought the European regulatory environment more closely aligned to what the US has been looking at and operating for many years. And so this is something of a bit of a challenge for them, but Qiagen has been quite ready to be able to pick up and move this forward and transition what we've needed to in our products as Europe as well, based on our US expertise.
I'm sure that we're going to send a copy of this to the FDA because when you say that FDA is a trendsetter, other people talking about them being bureaucratic and barriers, but you're saying they're a trendsetter. They're going to be very happy with the way you've referred to them, Ray.
They serve a very important function. So often I think people get caught up in the fact that they slow things down, they require so much in the way of thinking, but their whole purpose is to protect our society, is to protect all Americans from essentially people that are less scrupulous. There are people that we know, going back if you look at the founding of the FDA, it was really a response to snake oil vendors who were reselling people who don't know the difference in and outs on there. And so it's important to understand that for the customer's good, the FDA is doing something for them and helping them. We can work within those as efficiently and as effectively as possible. We can more quickly serve the customer's interests.
Well, thank you for those insights. But another thing that I think is important for our listeners to understand is Qiagen has played a role in the pandemic and working with other people who have been trying to come up with solutions for vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics related to the pandemic. So talk a little bit about Qiagen and its role related to what we've been going through for the last 2.5 years.
2.5 years for the pandemic. And that was really sort of a major load onto us. We were probably, when people talk about supply chains, we're one of the first companies to get hit with supply chain issues in early spring, late winter of 2020. We are the world's largest supplier at that time of viral RNA isolation kits. And this is a basic chemical lysis of the materials inside a sample to extract, stabilize, and extract the RNA. And we were not able to produce enough kits fast enough to meet the global demand for viral RNA testing, much to our chagrin and the world's chagrin. We very quickly had to pivot both in our global headquarters and manufacturing in Hilden, Germany, as well as Germantown, to ramp up production capabilities around this. Now, that's in the sample prep side of our company, but at the same time, then the assay side of our company that has worked in PCR started immediately working with WHO and the CDC and bringing together an assay panel set for PCR that could be used in conjunction for those. So for us, it was managing the supply chain has gone through a variety of waves, starting with sample prep and then going into assays. But overall, we have had a tailwind that's come out of it, and we have been very gracious in acknowledging the tailwind that has come out of the pandemic for us in terms of revenue and growth of our company, while at the same time acknowledging how much damage this has done to the world around us.
And have you caught up with the supply chain yet?
Yeah, with the sample prep, we were able to catch up with that within the first year. So that by the time we finished up Q3 of 2020, we were on top of those things. And this was really a global coordination effort, not just of Qiagen, but all of our suppliers that are coming in too. That was plastics, chemicals, and then logistics to be able to get them out of there, as so many of the logistics companies were being hit with employee and labor shortages. But we were able to get back on top of that by the end of 2020, so that by the time when 2021 came around, we were really able to leverage and really meet the global demand for both viral RNA isolations as well as cutting edge assay kits for this. One of the areas that we were able to really come back and help in terms of 2021, when we start looking at the different variants that started causing different surges in the pandemic, is that in the fall of 2020, we launched a digital PCR instrument platform that had been in development in-house for about 3.5 years before the pandemic. We were able to keep our launch schedule in place and manufacture it, but digital PCR is known for being exquisitely sensitive, much more sensitive than real-time PCR. And where we found fairly quickly a sweet spot is that in wastewater sampling for public health surveillance, this kind of technical platform excels. And this has been the area where we are now really strong. Local inside the United States, 70% of all the states that are doing wastewater testing for COVID-19 are working with Qiagen digital PCR products. So it's really been a big impact, not only for sample prep, but for the assay sides that we're able to bring in this as well.
Thank you for those insights, because a lot of people don't know how important Maryland and Montgomery County companies were to addressing the pandemic. And there's a lot of warp speed money. And we've looked at that. Almost 40% of the warp speed money came into one county in the United States, which is Montgomery County, Maryland. And a lot of people don't know the role that Qiagen has been playing. They hear about all of the vaccines that are under development, but they don't hear about the testing aspects of that, which you guys have been intimately involved in.
Well, yeah, that's true. And it's actually, in my time coming from a life sciences tools company and into a tools and IVD company in my career, it's interesting to see that even with my top role working with tech transfer offices, a lot of times there's a perception that biopharma is the driver. And certainly they've got the largest budget and the biggest money out there, but the diagnostic sector doesn't seem to get as much attention out of it. But there is a great deal of diagnostics activity. And one of the things I've enjoyed in my role, corporate BD and IVD, where I do technology triage, is getting to know some of the technologies coming out of the universities like Johns Hopkins or the NIH, and actually meeting the founders and working with them and identifying with them, because as a tools company, we can provide them tools to help them for development early on. We can give them advice along the way on how they can grow in there. What kind of a landing pad would be looking for them if they're looking for a diagnostic landing pad or exit plan for something on there. And so there's been this has been something I've worked with BHI entrepreneurs in residence like Albine Martin and companies that she has been working with to really help provide some guidance and feedback on there and facilitate the company's focus. One of the single biggest things we have as tools is that we have a 510K cleared DNA isolation product. Those kit lines carry the abbreviation DSP in the product name. That's different from our basic research ones because they are 510K. And if a diagnostics startup is looking to prepare something for an IVD submission, if they're able to start with a nucleic acid out of a standard 510K approved product, they can pretty much forget about trying to address the nucleic acid side. The FDA will accept what's coming from that, and they can focus on the assay that they're looking at, which is really the core point of the technologies that we're trying to bring out and grow to make improvements in life possible.
You had a great segue there, Ray, and that was really talking a little bit more about what your role is as the global licensing manager at Qiagen. So let's talk a little bit about what you do every day and what your outreach is and how it impacts Qiagen's involvement in licensing or investments or M&A activities that would be important for Qiagen's growth.
Certainly. So we have nominally two distinct teams within the corporate BD that are relationships managers. One is our M&A team and one is our licensing team. It's the IP and licensing team. So there's also a core of IP attorneys that support the licensing relationship managers like myself. And my job is in licensing, out licensing, and I also have a focus within the team on, as I call it, technology triage. Coming from almost 20 years of academic research, I have a certain fondness for working and dealing with the academic environment and the communities that are coming in there. And so I really enjoy working with the tech transfer offices. I'm a lead contact for those. The tech transferring offices really kind of developed the aspect to help meet the Bayh-Dole Act criteria of bringing inventions out to the public, started marketing technologies to various companies. And so I'm really the one with the target on my back for the tech transfer offices when they're sending out technology announcements, and the first set of eyes in terms of Qiagen to do that. So for me, I have to know the entire business within Qiagen. We are, as a team, have global responsibility across the entire organization. We have some unique focuses within each of our team members. It's the fun part of really kind of coming together with is it something that fits within our business, and is there a technical need that we have that the technology has? Does the patent boundary then allow how much protection or enablement does it go in there? And then is there a pragmatic business case on there that fits? And when I find that inside Qiagen, I'm essentially the gatekeeper to go find the right stakeholders and vet that and bring that to the table and then negotiate on their behalf for the end licensing agreement if we're coming from tech transfer. However, I have to admit, Qiagen has evolved into being a late-stage development company. So most of the offerings that we get from the tech transfer offices themselves are usually too early stage for us to come in and directly invest in most cases. But it's still, when we recognize that relationships are something that build over time, and we can focus on building those, watching what's happening, and as those are coming up, build those so that if and when there's an exit point for them, we already have a good relationship and understanding to perhaps be a preferred partner for that.
So since academic institutions and the NIH are very early stage and you've become later stage, how do you source and scout for later stage opportunities that would be synergistic with Qiagen today?
So the scouting activity within our team, while we do some of looking out for that, we are such a diverse company that actually the scouting is usually done within the product development and business teams themselves. Almost all of our business people are PhDs in science, as well as our product development people. And so we've got a very strong technical expertise in each team. And each team is given a great deal of autonomy in terms of how they operate. We're a very entrepreneurial spirit, and we still, coming out of an academic startup ourselves back in the mid-1980s, we have maintained a very collegial, collaborative environment inside. And so our product development team members and product managers are able to establish collaborations as needed to work with product lines that are coming out and develop those product lines that we have, or new product lines that are coming into place. So it's a bit of a challenge. There's not a standard kind of format to come through that I could say, but as my role as really sort of the traffic director for that, anything can be sent towards my way, and then will funnel it out to the parties that we have, or if it's clearly outside of something that we have, be able to at least acknowledge that we've seen and heard this, but we don't have the ability really to fit that into things that we're currently working on.
So I guess the key is to the extent that you're allowed or you can divulge, what are the highest priority areas today that you, from a licensing perspective, are looking for that our listeners might be interested in because they might be in those areas?
Right. So some of our core business areas that we're looking on, one of the things that we got as a tailwind for us was that we launched and acquired 2 IVD testing platforms shortly before the pandemic started. The pneumatics high throughput, rapid real-time PCR system was something we had invested heavily and acquired. We closed on that acquisition in August of 2020. And then the second one that we had acquired was called the QIAstat DX, which is we refer to as a syndromic testing platform. It looks almost like a toaster, if you will, where the slice of bread is a fully self-contained cartridge that would take either a swab or a pipetted blood sample or a sputum sample and fully closed up. And both of them will run real-time PCR assays in less than an hour to produce a diagnostic result that's actionable for the patients right there with it. The syndromic testing platform has the capability of up to 48 different targets within the system in that hour. And we had a respiratory panel that we launched that with originally, less than a year before the pandemic, that we very quickly added the COVID assays for both the CDC and the WHO onto this one. And this was really close near patient testing for the syndromic testing on there. But for better or for worse, the manufacturing scale-up had not reached the point where we could put these broadly at, for example, every airport that we wanted to. But what they did fit in very quickly for those patients that were coming in critical condition to the emergency rooms and being admitted directly to ICU, it very quickly allowed the doctors to determine were they infected with just COVID-19 or were they also co-infections that these patients were suffering from that would meet there. And the panel includes viral, bacterial, as well as fungal targets in that respiratory panel. Both of these systems, as we know, need a menu of assays for the customers who buy these kind of systems to maximize the utility from them. So our biggest focus right now is on expanding our menu of tests for those two platforms right now. And that's not something that can be fully developed in-house. It's got to come in from outside as well. And we are looking at, while they are centered on infectious disease, the other areas that of interest in this are oncology, genetic testing around oncology, and any other area that benefit from either a high throughput or a multi-targeted panel for syndromic testing are ones that we're looking at to bring in. I think that's our top part there. The digital PCR platform is also one that we're looking at expanding menu options. This is one that we launched as a research instrument, as many of our research products do, are planning to bring that over into diagnostic space to use. There's certain sensitivities around that for very rare detection, things related to liquid biopsy, which is also an expertise on the sample prep side that we have that nicely combined with that platform. And then last, we have a strong investment in the area of tuberculosis testing. I'd be remiss if I didn't come back and mention our Quatifuron Gold TB assay, which is the cornerstone of our manufacturing operations at the Germantown site. This is on-label approval for diagnosis of tuberculosis, but its sensitivity and specificity is such that both US CDC and the World Health Organization recognize and recommend this type of platform for screening, for public health screening of TB. It can detect latent TB, and it does not show positives for the tuberculosis vaccines that have been used throughout Europe, especially, that cause false positives for the traditional skin test. This has been a major growth driver for us. Like every test, it has a specific uses, and there are other related aspects of TB, such as antibiotic resistance, that are really becoming a concern as TB is a global health issue, both in developing and research challenged areas that are making TB a really kind of increasing threat to human well-being.
Well, you've outlined a number of priorities, Ray, and I'm sure that some people will be taking feverish notes to try to keep up with you. But for the listeners, there's also going to be a written transcript, so you can go back and check the written transcript after you've listened to Ray say it 3 times and you still didn't know what the priorities were because it was so technical. But we'll have a written transcript of this podcast for you as well. And you've talked a lot about the acquisition strategy and how Qiagen has grown not just organically, but through acquisitions. And I think it's important that people understand the BioHealth Capital Region and Maryland companies have been major beneficiaries of this strategy. And talk a little bit about, you mentioned to me that 3 companies right from Maryland have been acquired by Qiagen in our backyard.
That's right, Rich. I mean, we have a balanced strategy between organic growth and acquisition and look globally around this. But when you're nearby with companies, you get a chance to develop relationships and really understand where they go. And 3 of our successful acquisitions come right in from Maryland itself. The first one I mentioned already, which was Qiagen, which was as an IVD acquisition, was one of our largest ones, but really moved our company as a whole into the diagnostics business space. And then second was the company that I came into Qiagen with, which was Assay Biosciences, which is located out on the south side of Frederick. That facility is still a life sciences center of excellence for Qiagen, next generation DNA sequencing. Super A had focused on panels of real-time PCR assays and had developed a design engine for taking pathway-focused information, bringing it back around and creating panels. We've moved that engine into highly multiplexed primer amplification for next generation DNA sequencing. And that is really growing. We can do this very rapidly and quickly with customized panels that serve a variety of different segments in the market there. Third is QuantaBio, that was located in Rockville, which has some proprietary enzymes that they had developed. And Quanta still exists, and many people don't know that QuantaBio is a second brand of the Qiagen organization. We have several second brands that we manage, but QuantaBio is one of those. It's headquartered now in a combination of our Beverly site and our Frederick site for research. They make enzymes, they make similar sorts of kits, and most people can buy them through the Aventis VWR catalog and other distributors around the world. So when we look at the company and how we're balanced here, second brands are important. I should add to that another part of the way Qiagen operates in this, and this is indicative of the second brand philosophy, is we know we cannot address every segment in the market. And consequently, our ability to have relationships with our competitors in the tool space, as well as developing companies, are important. So we have a very strong business-to-business OEM sales organization. And this is built around not only kits, but enzyme production that we have. Many of the next generation DNA sequencing companies are now using Qiagen enzymes in kits that have no recognition on there. We do some oligonucleotide synthesis for diagnostic and clinical grade coming out of Qiagen gene synthesis in Sweden. So there's a very strong element here that we do not see competition as a blocker. We see something as competition that is used to improve human well-being overall.
You know, one of the things I love is you're a model citizen because you just mentioned Rockville, Germantown, Gaithersburg, Frederick. I mean, how could people in Maryland not be happy with Qiagen's commitment to this state and to this region and how you have grown organically and done well, especially when you have the regulatory body and research bodies, NIH and FDA. You have all those facilities, acquisitions you're making, and I would imagine a lot of the talent that comes into Qiagen also comes from the same region, right?
You're right. We do, although we do bring in talent from around. As you mentioned, I'm from Los Angeles. I grew up in California. Yeah, that's where I thought I was going to be working my long term. Moved to Florida, got to know, time where Gainesville is really a cosmopolitan oasis in the deep South. And while Florida has done a great job building startups, they don't seem to be able to build it into as any sort of bio-capital hub. The startups have the scientific expertise, but when they get proof of principle, they get bought and moved up the coast. And as a then Maryland transplant myself, who's been here since 2004, I have to say on a personal level, it's been very rewarding and gratifying to be in a state with such advantages to networking, state that's friendly towards the growth and the economic development, as well as maintaining the environmental and the community aspects that are important to go along with this. I'm going to use that as a little bit of a segue because Qiagen in our transitions over the last several years, where we have a new CEO, our longtime one, Per Schatz, had stepped down in October of 2019. Terry Bernard, who had been heading our diagnostics, stepped up as an interim, and in the middle of 2020 was appointed permanent CEO. At the same time, we were also under an agreement for being acquired by Thermo Fisher, which fell through. And now Qiagen has been moving forward on our own. And really, under Terry's guidance now, we are making a very clear direction and growing very nicely, I think, with a good plan going forward. And Maryland is still a very, very strong part of that commitment going forward.
Well, thank you very much for your commitment. And I think a lot of the listeners have learned a lot more about Qiagen today. Is there anything that you and I haven't discussed that you think that would be beneficial for them to know?
I think that really the beneficial thing is if you're not sure and you take a look at the website, see something that might be on there, please go ahead and reach out to us. We do have a generic bd@qiagen.com email address that goes into the corporate BD team, but also any of your regional Qiagen reps. I do have maintained good contacts with our commercial operations folks, and it is a collaborative effort across our entire organization to identify and meet our customers' needs.
And their website is?
www.Qiagen, that's Qiagen.com.
Yeah, I know there's no you. I mean, but it's me and I, and there's a lot of yous, but not in the name, I'm sure.
That's right, yeah.
If somebody wanted to contact you directly, Ray, would you be willing to have your contact information?
Yes. And that's fairly straightforward too. It is my first full name, which is Raymond.Blanchard@Qiagen.com.
Great. Super. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure everybody appreciates that. This has been fantastic. Even though I've known about Qiagen and affiliated with them for about 10 years, I've learned a lot more that I didn't know through this interview with you, Ray. And I appreciate your going all the way back to the origins and its evolution for growing in this BioHealth Capital Region and in Maryland, and to the extent that it has today. So I want to thank you very much for being on BioTalk. We've been talking to Ray Blanchard, Associate Director for Global Licensing for Qiagen, one of the major committed global companies located in our region, continuing to grow and take advantage of all the assets that we have in our region. So Ray, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rich. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.